and reduction of a car parking requirement. So thank you. Do we have any apologies tonight? We do have one, Councillor Sullivan. Do we have any declarations of conflict of interest? If anybody has any conflict, of course, they'll raise it if it becomes obvious. So we want to confirm the minutes. Sorry. I want to confirm the minutes for the last meeting. Can I have a mover and seconder for the last meeting? Councillor Aitken and Councillor Nelson. Yep. So those in favour? Carried. So we will be following the usual procedure tonight. The usual procedure is that the officer will present a brief summary of the written report to the committee. The panel may then ask questions to the officer. The objectors or submitters will detail their concerns to the committee, and we request a 3-minute time limit for each objector and try not to be repetitive. The panel will also may ask questions of the objector or the submitter. The applicant will detail their application and respond to any objector-submitter concerns to the committee, and that can take 5 to 10 minutes. The panel may ask questions of the applicant. The panel will then further discuss the application and will make a decision. Now, this decision of this committee is the final decision of council acting under a delegated authority, and if anyone is aggrieved by this decision, by the decision of this committee, they may appeal to the Victorian Civil and Administrative Tribunal in Melbourne, VCAT, and our staff are available to assist with this process during business hours. So we're ready to start with the first application, 34 Barrabool Road, Highton, and I ask the officer to please make the presentation.
Thank you, Councillor and Chair. I'm Steve Rusak. I'm at the time was a principal planner with the Statutory Planning Department looking after this application. So this is an application that's come to the Planning Committee for a second time. Those who were with us last time know that in April the matter was brought to Planning Committee and the decision deferred to consider some changes which have now occurred, and I'll talk to that a little bit further. But obviously for all of those present and those perhaps who weren't familiar before, I'll treat it afresh to be thorough, I suppose. The application, or the planning permit application, seeks approval for the construction of 10 apartments, a multi-lot subdivision, and the alteration of an access to the road, Barrabool Road, which is in what we call a Transport Zone 2, part of the principal road network. It's a fairly large site, just under 1,000 square metres, and it's about 110 metres from the Highton village, for those who are familiar with the area. So very close to the shops and facilities of Highton village. Being a larger than average sized lot, it has almost 20 metres, or a bit under 20 metres of frontage to Barrabool Road, and nearly 50 metres depth, so fairly sizable. Currently there's a single dwelling on the land, with some outbuildings and constructed vehicle access, of course, and established garden and landscaping. The site's in a general residential zone 4, GRZ4 we often say. It's also affected by an overlay, the special building overlay, which is that one that takes into consideration the effect of floodwater in large rain events and the drainage network's capacity. So not a flooding overlay, but it considers stormwater, let's say. There are no other overlays, but there is a relevant local policy that has to do with increased housing diversity. So we say that this is in an increased housing diversity area, or IHDA, because of its proximity to the activity centre of Highton Village. I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. The three-storey apartment building that's proposed comprises a basement car park with all of the required car parking for the 10 apartments and visitors. That basement car park is accessed, as we said before, via a newly constructed double-width access ramp down through the middle of the frontage into the basement. The building will be set back 4 metres from the front boundary, with balconies at ground and mid-floor levels, and an upper storey or a third storey. So we have the ground floor, we have the first floor and the second floor, so for a 3-storey building, and the basement, of course. Overall height comes in at about 11 metres above the flood level, which is the way we measure these things, so well within the maximum allowable height for the zone. The building itself's been, I'd say, architecturally designed. Certainly a lot of work's gone into the design and the use of materials, contrasting materials to add visual interest, a contemporary style building. Obviously these things are assessed differently by the various people who look at it, but it contains a mix of materials including timber cladding, cement, stones, standing seam, metal, those types of modern materials. There's a landscaping plan, of course, so the plan set shows that there's landscaping within the front setback, so that's that bit between the boundary and the front of the building, and a pedestrian access to the front of the building, from the front of the building around to the side and the main entrance for all of the apartments. The plan of subdivision shows each of the apartments will occur on their own allotment with their own car parking space in the basement, and obviously the common areas, and some of those common areas include a common or communal outdoor area at the rear that's landscaped as well as the common access areas through hallways and the front of the site. The application was referred to all the relevant referral authorities, of course the Water Authority, Power Authority, the Road Management Authority as well, which in this case Regional Roads Victoria, formerly Vic Roads. None of those authorities objected to the grant of the permit, and many have provided conditions for a permit if it gets issued. The application was also referred internally to our units, including urban design, engineering, of course, the special building overlay triggers a referral requirement to the Floodplain Management Authority for consideration of the effects of stormwater. And again, all of those units provided recommended conditions in the event that a permit gets issued. The application was given, or public notice of the application was given. It attracted a number of objections, 8 formal objections and 2 informal submissions of objection, as well as a submission of support. Primarily the concerns related to the building size, bulk and scale in this location, the number of apartments and relevant concerns around additional traffic, congestion, concerns around safety of vehicles accessing and coming in and out of the site, of course, and the footpath and potential conflicts with pedestrians, and obviously coming out onto the main road was a concern for some people. And the loss of vegetation, the established garden, and things like tree protection were also raised as matters of concern. Those who were familiar back in the April Planning Committee meeting will be aware that there was a recommendation by the officers to refuse the application on a single matter only, and that had to do with the extent of overshadowing of the building to properties to the southwest, 2 properties in particular, 2 units on the southwest side. At that meeting there were submissions by the applicant to perhaps make changes to address those concerns, which of course was one of the reasons, or the main reason why we've deferred, or the Planning Committee has deferred to tonight, to allow officers to go away and assess those changes, but also to circulate and allow those changes to be reviewed by all objectors. And that process was carried out over May and June. There have been no further objections received. And the officers, myself in particular, has assessed this to find that the concerns around overshadowing have been addressed. The issue was around significant overshadowing. The shadowing extent was significant, and it's been reduced by a clever approach and design approach by the designers to essentially set back further the side walls of the building from the side boundaries where the shadows are worse. And that allows for the shadows to be reduced to that acceptable level that we seek in the assessments of design detail through Res Code that you'll be familiar with, Clause 55 of the scheme. And the interesting aspect to this, I think, and I'm sure the applicant will perhaps talk more about this if asked, has to do with the fact that in some parts of the day, the shadow outcome that's been achieved here is in fact better than today, better than the existing buildings on the land at certain times of day. So there's been a real balance achieved, and officers are satisfied that the ground for refusal has been addressed, and we're in a position now where we're able to support the grant of a permit, given that all of those design considerations were fully addressed and no further objections were received. Overwhelmingly, there's policy support for diversity of housing styles in this location, particularly due to that increased housing diversity policy that we have, the IHDA area that we're in. So that encourages townhouses, apartments and other types of housing to be introduced into that area. And of course, the Planning Committee is familiar with some approvals over the last, let's say, year or two that have supported that policy by introducing some apartment stock and townhousing stock in the area, which obviously addresses one of the most high-profile elements of this, which of course providing housing in established urban areas. So having assessed all of those requirements under Clause 55 of the design requirements of the scheme as well as the policy, it's the officer's recommendation that a permit be granted for this development.
Thank you, Steve. Councillors, any questions? Councillor Aitken?
Chair, you said there were no additional objections. Were there any objectors withdrawn once the amended application was actually presented? Because, correct me, did we have 8 objectors last time and we've got 8 objectors now? So no one actually did withdraw their objection? Because
that's correct. Yep, none were withdrawn.
At the April meeting, wasn't there some people that actually were wavering themselves during that objection process? Yeah.
So the changes were circulated to all of those who had lodged objections, and that allows them to consider whether or not their concerns are addressed, and it's entirely voluntary for objectors to choose whether they do or not. We certainly place no pressure on anybody to do so, and as a result of that, no objections have been withdrawn, so we have the same number we had before.
That's an important point, that clearly they must have believed the basis of their objections hadn't been resolved by the planning changes that were presented by the applicant.
I can't speak to that. I think that would be the sort of question that would need to go to the objectors themselves. Yeah.
Any other questions? Councillor Nelson?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I've got a few questions, but the first one's around the objectors. And you said there were no additional objectors, but was there a sign put up to say that there was been amendments to the application? Otherwise, who's going to know?
So the way we approach the circulation of plans with changes, as opposed to a re-notification or re-advertising, the distinction comes about as a result of the changes reducing the size and effect of the development rather than increasing it or introducing anything new that wasn't put on notice before. So because the building, if you like, has changed shape and gotten smaller, it's normal planning practice that we don't re-advertise that instead we engage with those who have already seen it and had a problem with it before by virtue of the objections that they've lodged. So, short answer, no signs on site, just communication with those who have objected.
Original objectors, yeah.
Correct.
Okay. And Councillor Wilkinson rightly pointed out a tree in the adjoining property. That tree is right actually on I've just put it up on Google Maps, right on the boundary of the two developments, or the two houses. Is that tree, is there any restrictions around that tree not metres overshadowing inside the other inside the proposed development. So will that tree get knocked over, or what?
Talking about the very large tree on the northwest.
The north,
sorry,
northeast
northwest
side.
end.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're well aware of that. There's an easement between the building and that tree, so I think there's some, maybe a sewer pipe or water pipe or something. I'm not quite sure, but there's a sizable easement through that part of the site. So that easement acts as a bit of a protection, but there has been, if I remember correctly, there are conditions in there around tree protection for any trees within distance of the property boundary to ensure that that if required, the protection measures get put in place in the event that a permit's issued and construction was to commence.
And you talked about the SBO not being affected, the apartments not being affected, but what about if it floods? What about the basement? Will that get flooded?
Oh, great question. We asked this one of engineers around what happened, because Barrable Road, of course, and those who know the area, is prone to flooding, particularly in very large rain events and large volumes of water down Barrable Road. The engineering solution to this particular development is the installation of something called a floodgate. Now, I had to learn a little bit about what a floodgate is because we don't see a lot of these in Geelong, but we're seeing more of them. And it's essentially a mechanical gate that comes up, if you like, at the entrance to the ramp and it's actually sort of, if water enters at that part, it actually causes the gate to rise to prevent water entering into the basement. It's quite a clever solution, used a lot in places like Sydney and other places. So the short answer is the floodgate prevents flooding of the basement up to and above the flood level for that site. So there's an engineering solution and it's required that get installed in the event that they obtain a permit.
Can you tell me what page that's on so I can have a quick look at it while...
Councillor Nelson, could you please speak into the microphone?
Sorry, Mr Chair. Could you tell me what page that's on so I can have a quick read of it? Thanks, John. What page is that?
Fantastic. We've got page 25.
25, thanks for that. Thank
Yeah.
you. Sorry, Mr Chair. That's all for the moment. I'll have a read of that because that used to be where the creek used to run across, and it's been engineered out, but that's why it floods, because there's a creek there. Yeah. Cardinia Creek.
I should point out, of course, we rely on the expertise of the floodplain management engineers to advise us on all of those sorts of things, and they've provided some conditions in the event that they get a permit.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr Chair.
Councillors, any other questions? Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you. And thanks for the clarification just about the eucalyptus tree. So I think it is on the adjoining property, that substantial tree. I note that there's a detailed landscape plan which is leading to increased tree canopy, because I know that there were a few objections based on the loss of tree canopy. Can you, I suppose just in terms of design, was there consideration given to keeping established trees in the construction of the apartments?
I can't speak to what considerations were given at those really early stages of design. It might be a question to put to the applicant in their submissions tonight. But in terms of the planning assessment requirements, Clause 55 does have a requirement for us as officers to consider the landscape objectives of the area and to be respectful of those. Where there's an established landscape character, that should be respected. The established landscape character in this area is what technically I think planners call a garden suburban character. We expect to see side setbacks of buildings, so to allow the establishment of, let's say, shrubs or trees and other things down the sides of buildings, behind buildings. And one of the key elements, I think, that assists this proposal is the fact that they haven't designed the building to go from boundary to boundary. They've provided those spaces, and in fact, since last planning committee and the plans we saw previously, there's been an enhancement of that, particularly along the side boundary, just to provide that little bit of extra landscape and vegetation along the side, but also for some privacy and noise attenuation for the neighbours next door with some tree plantings along the side. So in some respects, they've met and some might say exceeded the landscape requirements of the scheme for this site.
Thank you.
Any other questions, councillors? So thank you very much, Steve. Then I'll ask the objector that's been registered, Ken Anderson, to come forward. Is Ken here? Well, I'm sorry, Ken's not here, and Ken is the only registered objector. Is Marshall Sullivan the applicant? Now, I think we might need two chairs. Very good initiative there, sir.
Thank you, Councillor
We've
Mason.
learned a bit from last time, haven't we? So
No,
please
thank
go
you.
ahead, Marshall.
Thank you, councillors. So we won't make a lengthy submission here. What I did want to point out again was we endorse the officer's report again. We agree with the recommendations. The plans that were amended do address the officer's concerns. We did hear from Mr. Rusak about the IHDA and what that policy around increased housing diversity. This council had the initiative back in 2007 to bring in a document referred to as the Housing Diversity Strategy. So that document later amended in 2008, so it's some 16 odd years old, identified all of the areas in the Greater Geelong area where increased housing ought to occur. And that was to address what we already knew in this region, which is that it is popular, it is growing, and we need to do that in the right way. The Victorian government just recently gave us a new strategy, which was to introduce 800,000 houses. And that number, over 139,000 houses need to be accommodated in the city of Greater Geelong alone by 2051. So we have a housing diversity strategy that identifies ideally where that ought to occur, and we're smack bang in the middle of that. This proposal seeks to introduce a development that is directly in line with the policy framework, and it delivers a housing product, fairly modest one. It's only 10 apartments. This isn't an overdevelopment of the site, and we're still achieving a 35% garden area requirement. We're still achieving really good canopy tree cover. The reference to the tree on the adjoining property is acknowledged. We're well set back from those trees, and we agree with the conditions of the officers in terms of implementing the findings of the arborist's report, and indeed there's a condition on there that requires a more detailed landscape plan that introduces, it actually specifies a criteria of I think it's roughly around the 46 square metres of garden area or canopy coverage of the trees. In terms of the objections, we have 8. We started with 8 and we're finishing with 8. And indeed, the concerns that the objections have raised a combination of subjective and in terms of the traffic and overdevelopment and those concerns. They're concerns that they've raised. They're real to them. We agree with the officers and the findings of the Department of Transport in relation to traffic and the built form components that this is appropriate. So we're not here to change their mind. That's their view. But from a planning assessment point of view, it's acceptable. Again, as I said, I'm not going to labour on all of that. Again, we're here to answer any questions. I've got Sash here as the architect. So we're in your hands, I guess, councillors. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got the first question this time would be, could you elaborate a little bit on how you resolved the overshadowing objection?
Although it wasn't necessarily an objection, it was an observation in the assessment that Steve made in regards to the overshadowing. And what we did there on the ground, on the second floor level, we had a 3-bedroom apartment. what we've done is recessed that side. We've turned that back down into a 2-bedroom apartment to pull back that side setback about 2.5 metres, I think it was from memory, which then resulted in a lower roof height closer to the neighbouring boundaries and properties, therefore reducing the shadowing. And like Steve mentioned, it was a fairly extensive exercise in assessing those overshadowing diagrams where our change in the plan actually improved daylight to their private open spaces and created a better solution than what currently exists for daylight during the day. So to answer your question, we reduced the size of the building in a portion that affected those neighbouring properties and reduced one apartment from a 3-bedroom to a 2-bedroom to be able to pull that wall back 2.5 metres.
Thank you. Any other questions, councillors? Councillor Wilkinson.
I think there was an objection or there was an issue around the overshadowing, casting a shadow over someone's solar panels. Was that resolved as part of this process as well?
Yeah, and that actually, the change actually improved that or eliminated that overshadowing. So I think in the original format, I think we had a portion of 8% or 12% of overshadowing in the summertime where panels are at most, I guess, most relevant. And at this point, we've eliminated all of that summer overshadowing, and obviously the winter shadowing is always going to be affected even from the neighbouring townhouse that's behind it because of the low portion of the angle of the sun. So that's been eliminated, and we've been in discussions with the neighbour about that and clarified that, and I think Ken couldn't make it today, which is unfortunate, but his other concerns were about privacy in regards to screening on that boundary, which we've accommodated in this resubmission as well, with additional screening along that walkway to the front door of the apartments.
Just one question, one more about trees. Because it's becoming more and more evident that, in terms of building development, that some of the larger trees are being removed in order for us to maximise these buildings. Was there consideration, and I note that one of the trees is smack bang in the middle on the nature strip right in front of this apartment block, but I'm just wondering, was consideration given in terms of your design to keep some of the larger trees?
Yeah, listen, and that's generally a consideration to take into account when we're doing these things. What we found is the trees, you can see it on P003, there's a couple of existing trees right in the back corner, which are of low quality. And the idea was that rear space become a common area for the occupants, and we'd reinvest some money into providing a better tree canopy with new trees throughout. Obviously, the big one next door we can't touch, that we've accommodated for that by pulling our building off that back boundary, but the value of those existing trees was low. So therefore, as you'll see in our landscape plan, we've got the southern side or southeastern side of the site accommodates a fair bit of canopy across that sort of interaction buffer between our site and those neighbouring properties on that southeastern side, and we've got new canopy trees planted across the front to improve the canopy cover.
Thank you. Any other questions, councillors? Councillor Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, sorry. The floodgate, I'm just interested as to where that floodgate is on the property. How far from the boundary is it? From children's fingers is where I'm thinking,
Sorry, what was that?
Children's fingers
Yeah.
is where I'm thinking. Kids walking past and see something rising and go, oh, and try and stick their fingers at it.
Well, hopefully it's raining that much that they're inside. But our original proposal had it at the boundary, and we've done that previously on another project in McNichol Street. There is a condition on Steve's report recommendation that it's set back 1 metre from the boundary, and that means it's down further down the ramp. But it is set back from the boundary. And it sits, just to clarify, it sits flush with the driveway. So when it's not in operation, it just is a stainless steel plate that it's part of the crossover.
Yeah, I saw it on the map.
Yep.
Thanks.
Thank you. I'm sorry I didn't ask you to introduce yourself before. I gather you are Sash Macheski?
That is me.
Yeah.
The one and only.
Okay. Thanks very much. No further questions?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, if I can just bring the attention to answer the question, condition 1 C on the recommended conditions relates to the location of the floodgate.
Go ahead.
Confidence.
But on page 37, is it? Is that the one? Oh, the amended conditions.
Thank you, gentlemen. Any other questions for the officers? Are we ready for a motion, or do we need to discuss it further? Any other inputs?
Mr Chair, I'd like to move an alternate recommendation.
Well, we need to, as anybody wants to move the original motion in the first instance, a mover? Councillor Hathaway, and a seconder. Now, we've got two ways of approaching this. We could debate this, or we can accept your original motion, your alternate motion. Do we have a seconder for the alternate motion? Governance? I just want to get that set in stone. We will debate the alternate first now. Go ahead, please, Councillor Nelson.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I've still got concerns with regard to this application and the process that's taken place. The fact that most people didn't know that this was happening, and that's evident because no one's turned up. I have concerns about the change in road access and the safety around that. I have concerns around the fact that it's on a transport zone 2. It's an extremely busy road. I drive it every day, multiple times a day. I drove past this site again this afternoon on the way here. I have concerns around the visual bulk. There's a housing diversity that's 16 years old, yet these developments aren't being built in Highton because they don't sell. I spoke to a real estate agent about this on the weekend, and she expressed her concerns that one in Belmont, just around the corner from this, they built 6 apartments and they didn't sell because people don't want to live there. They are not good places to live. It's not part of the neighbourhood character of Highton. I don't think it sits well within the framework of the Highton village or the surrounding neighbourhood at all. I've got concerns about the floods and concerns around the tree at the back. So, and I'm really concerned that the fact that the objectors haven't turned up tonight. So I'm concerned that they weren't notified. So we're only taking one side over another. So that's why I can't support this application tonight, Mr Chair.
Thank you.
I was happy to second the motion was for it, but I do acknowledge that the applicant has attempted to try to address the concerns, and even the latest proposal that they presented before us is an attempt to do that. But I'm also conscious that you actually have to look at the amenity and the neighbourhood character of the particular areas, and we've got another issue coming up with this as well too. And when you look at the neighbourhood character and the amenity, it does seem to be a significant overbuild. I mean, we're taking one residential house and we're putting a minimum of about 10 dwellings on an existing residential area. So I sympathise with the position that's been presented by the local ward councillor, Councillor Nelson, that when you look at it holistically, and the impact it makes to the broader community area there, it was appropriate that the officers originally rejected it, and it's appropriate tonight as well too, as Councillor Nelson has indicated.
Before we go any further, I'd just like to ask the officers a question. I just want to be sure whether what the processes were undertaken in terms of the objectors and why they're not here. I know you don't know why they're not here tonight, but I heard that they didn't know. What was that made clear to them or not?
Thank you for the question, Councillor. Absolutely. All objectors have received confirmation of email of the invitation tonight. Ken did say he may not be able to attend. He did get in touch with us saying he may attend, he may not. So he certainly has been in touch. We have confirmation that the other objectors have been informed. Noting the other objectors aren't adjoining neighbours, they're in the more surrounding area, but they've certainly been made aware of the meeting both in April, of which they didn't attend, and the meeting tonight as well.
Thank you, Mr Rush.
Just a point of clarification, Mr McCracken is an adjoining neighbour. He's at the back in Ferndale.
So the list of 8 objectors.
McCracken, Ferndale Parade. Back to
Apologies, yes. So we've got objectors in Myers Street, Schubert Avenue, Exmoor Close, Ferndale. Apologies, that's correct. That's a correction.
Thank you. Do we have any speakers against? Councillor Hathaway.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I will be speaking against the alternate. Acknowledge it's always difficult when the objectors aren't in the room to hear from them directly, but we have had an outline from officers and from the applicant tonight on what some of those objections were, and based on the balance of things and what's been presented to us tonight, my reading of tonight is that the applicant has been quite reasonable in addressing those objections and concerns that have come up. So for myself on planning grounds, I would find it difficult at this point to be finding something to justify supporting the alternate recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Hathaway. Councillor Wilkinson.
Could I just ask to just clarify that there was one single reason why officers had chosen not to proceed the last time? Could you just give me what that reason was again, just to remind us?
And so when an application of this nature is assessed under the requirements of this scheme, there are some mandatory requirements that must be met. And if they're not, the permit must be refused. And there are, of course, a whole range of factors that get assessed and acceptable outcomes are sufficient. Of the mandatory requirements, Clause 55 of the Residential Development Standards has a set of standards, but also a set of objectives. Standards can be met, objectives must be met. One of those relates to overshadowing, or actually there's a couple there, solar access to private open space of adjoining land. The standard was varied, but it was varied to such an extent that the officers weren't comfortable in assessing it to have met the objective, and therefore there was that single ground of refusal to say the shadowing was too much. And obviously, having gone away and worked on that, we are now in a position to say comfortably, very comfortably, that the objective is met. Standards still varied, but the objective is met, and that mandatory requirement has now been achieved.
In light of that, and in light of what we've heard tonight, and the fact that the objectors were notified that the meeting was on and have, they're not here, unfortunately, to present their case, I'll also be, not supporting the alternative recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Wilkinson. Any other speakers? I'll add something, and having heard the cases put tonight and having studied the documents also quite carefully, I understand that neighbourhood character exists in everyone's perceptions, but it also exists in terms of preferred neighbourhood character. And the preferred neighbourhood character conforms with the increased density requirements in this area. So I see no reason in those terms to object to the development. I think from what's been put to us today and previously, the buildings have been carefully designed and they conform to all all of the statutory requirements, all of the different authorities, none of them have objected. So in those terms, I also don't support the alternative motion. Do we have any other speakers? I'm therefore going to put the motion. Those in favour of the motion? Those against? The motion is lost, and therefore we now put the original motion of the officers as a substantive motion. Do we have a mover? Councillor Hathaway. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Wilkinson. Councillor Hathaway, would you like to speak further?
Nothing further to add, Mr Chair, thank you.
Councillor Wilkinson.
I think in light of what we've heard and of a careful reading of the materials that have been chosen for this particular development, I've got nothing further to add apart from, approving this.
Any other speakers? I put the motion. Oh, sorry, Councillor Nelson.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Yeah, I'd certainly like to express my concern about this application and the fact that it doesn't sit within the amenity of this area. There aren't any 4-storey buildings in Highton, none, commercial or residential. There aren't any 10 apartment subdivisions in Highton, none. So I can't, in all honesty, see how this fits within the neighbourhood character, and I can't see how I could possibly support an overdevelopment of this site, a massive overdevelopment of the site that Highton people don't want and people don't want to live in. That's what I think. And that's what my residents are telling me.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. So, unless there's any other inputs, I'll put the motion. Those in favour of the recommendation? I take it that it's carried. Thank you. We'll now move on to, I'll just give a moment for the gallery to settle. Everybody ready? Thanks, everybody. So we'll now move on to the second item tonight for consideration, 26 Hicks Street, Lara. The applicant is Ashmarks Investment Proprietary Limited, and as I've said, it's 26 Hicks Street, Lara, Commercial 2, Zone C2Z. So could I ask the officer, please introduce yourself again.
Thanks, Councillor Mason. I'm Verity Bright, Principal Planner.
Thank you, Verity. Would you please go ahead?
The site is located at 26 Hicks Street, Lara, opposite the Lara train station. The site contains an existing dwelling and has a total area of 882 square metres.
Could you just please move the microphone closer to you if you can? Just for the sake of everyone's comfort, could you please start again, Verity?
The site is located at 26 Hicks Street, Lara, opposite the Lara train station. The site contains an existing dwelling and has a total area of 882 square metres. The application is for a commercial development within a commercial 2 zone, and the site's not covered by any overlays. The commercial building will be 3 stories with car parking at basement level and will have an overall height of 11.6 metres. It is noted that the development proposes a food and drink premises and offices. However, these uses do not require planning permission in accordance with the commercial 2 zone requirements. Planning permission is required for the shop component of the building. Further to this, the existing dwelling on the site has recently started operating as an office, again a use that can occur in the commercial 2 zone without a planning permit. The purpose of the commercial 2 zone encourages different offices and retail uses. The application has also considered business ID signage, which is to be internally illuminated, and a reduction of the car parking requirements. A total of 49 car parking spaces have been provided within the basement through the provision of 2 mechanical stackers. The planning scheme requires 62 spaces be provided, which means there's a shortfall of 13 car parking spaces that cannot be provided on the site. The planning scheme anticipates and allows for mechanical car parking, and these spaces will be reserved for staff members of the building. The traffic report prepared with the application expects that the visitors to the site are likely to be associated with the shop or the food and drink premises, which can utilise timed on-street car parking. The application has been on public notice 3 times through the process, and notice was undertaken via a sign on site, letters to the adjoining owners and occupiers, as well as emails directly to the objectors during the additional notice period. The public notice outcome can be summarised as follows. We received 2 letters of support, a total of 125 objections, and 4 objections that were withdrawn during the process, including one from VicTrack in conjunction with V-Line and the Department of Transport. The proposal was internally referred to the following council departments: Engineering for traffic, car parking and drainage considerations, Waste for waste management and collection, and our Environmental, Sustainable Development and Urban Design team. All the internal departments did not object to the proposal. Some of them suggested conditions for the permit. The application was also externally referred to the Department of Transport, Fire Rescue Victoria and VicTrack, all of who did not object to the proposal and did not recommend any conditions for the permit. As detailed within the report, the application has been through a significant and thorough planning assessment with 7 formal amendments to the plans. The application was originally lodged for an education centre, which required a car parking reduction of 54 spaces. The commercial building was originally 4 stories plus a basement with an overall height of approximately 15 metres. If I can take you to page 116 of the agenda, you can see an image of the development that was advertised the first time. The first round of public notice was when we received the most objections, and you can see how the original building was more than 2 stories higher than the neighbouring warehouses. If I can take you to page 118 of the agenda, this shows the development, how it has been assessed at a reduced number of stories to 3 and a reduced overall height. You can also see how the upper levels have been recessed from the front, side and rear boundaries. Prior to an assessment of the application, we held a planning information meeting in March 2024, where all the objectors were invited to hear council, the applicant and the applicant's traffic engineer to speak to the application. The meeting was attended by about 25 objectors, and while no changes were made to the plans following the meeting, it did allow objectors to ask questions of the applicant and ask specific traffic and car parking questions directly to the traffic engineer. Based on the final set of plans from December 2023, the application was assessed against the relevant parts of the Greater Geelong Planning Scheme, including the state and local policy, commercial 2 zone, and the relevant particular provisions, including the car parking requirements. And on balance, the application was considered to comply with the relevant policies, and it's been recommended that a notice of decision to grant a planning permit be issued. Thank you.
Thank you, Verity. I've got an immediate question. I possibly haven't absorbed some of the details, but I do understand originally it was a 4-storey building. I do understand that there were whatever number of car parks were required for that, 64, whatever it was. Now that's been reduced, and there was, I think now, from what I read, there's 10 surplus car parks. I don't quite understand what. Could you please clarify? Because we've been through a number of amendments, what are we talking about now in terms of the requirement of car parks for this 3-storey building without the education centre and all of those requirements? What's the requirement of car parking, and is there or is there not a surplus of car parks?
So the building is required to have 62 car parking spaces, and 49 have been provided on site, so there's a shortfall of 13 spaces.
This is for the 3-storey building?
Yep, that's correct.
Okay. Could you explain then why this is acceptable?
This has been detailed in the officer report, but we have assessed it against the car parking provisions, and given the proximity to the train station, it has been considered appropriate. And also there is a requirement for bike spaces and showers and end-of-trip facilities that are required, and they only need 6 bike spaces, and they've provided 10. So they've provided 16, so there's a surplus of 10 bike spaces as well. So we have conditioned that a green travel management plan be provided, and this is a plan for people that work in the building to consider alternative modes of transport as well.
Thank you. Councillors, any other questions? Councillor Aitken.
Through the chair, there were 125 objectors, which is quite a large lot for an application that's presented before the council. You said that 2 withdrew. Is that right? Only out of the 125? Is that?
There was 4 objections that were withdrawn, but 2 of those, one was from VicTrack in conjunction with V-Line, and the other one was from the Department of Transport. So both of those objections were withdrawn.
Can you elaborate why they originally objected and then they withdrew? What was the basis of for their original objection, and why did they withdraw the objection then? Yeah.
When the application was lodged as an education centre, there's a requirement of the planning scheme that we have to refer it to the Department of Transport. And so we sent it to them, and they had concerns with the reduction of car parking at that time because the reduction was 54 spaces. But then when they amended the application and took away the education centre, the car parking rate changed and the reduction was reduced to the 13 spaces. So they said that they no longer had concerns with the reduction of car parking because it had been reduced so significantly. And VicTrack was the same. And their withdrawal of objection specifically said that their response had been provided in conjunction with V-Line, who had looked at it, because they were originally concerned with people going to be parking in the train station car park and it impacting for commuters. But given the car parking reduction was reduced significantly, they had no concerns anymore.
And you made a statement that the V-Line car park will be able to be used for neighbouring properties and is used as a justification for reduction. Is that a different policy position of VicTrack and V-Line? Because this week there was a major article in the Geelong Advertiser that the V-Line car park at CBD in Geelong, they're actually now going to be policing and enforcing that people who are not using the V-Line parking for parking purposes associated with the travel will now start to be fined and towed away. So is there a policy difference between Lara and Geelong? Because I mean, maybe it's not a planning question, but it impacts it certainly does impact on our planning decision in that V-Line have said that the CBD Geelong train station is not available for non-usage unless you're actually a commuter, but we're actually using the Lara car parking facility for non-commuters. So I'm not sure V-Line is giving consistent information and policing of their position, and we're making planning decisions based on subjective assessments of holdings and infrastructure. Yeah.
Yes, I can't comment on the Geelong train station, just focusing on this application being in Lara. But the car parking reduction considered that people can take alternative modes of transport to and from the site, not that the extra 13 spaces would need to park in the train station car park. That we're saying that because it's in such a good location and people can use alternative modes of transport, that the reduction of 13 spaces is okay. But with this application, or even non-planning applications, like we can't control who uses the Lara train station car park. That would be up to V-Line to manage themselves. Like you said, they will be with the Geelong car park.
And look, thank you. I think you've answered the question. I mean, like V-Line could police the car park at Lara the same they're policing the Geelong car park, which essentially is if you're not a commuter using the train, you can't park in there for auxiliary and other services. So it's a real risk that we probably need to consider in our decision that we make as councillors as well too. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Aitken. Councillor Hathaway.
Thank you. My question was just if there were any specific officer concerns in relation to environmentally sustainable development or best practice, and specifically what some of those concerns might be, if there are any.
There isn't any specific concerns. We did refer it to our ESD officers and they were supportive subject to conditions which have been recommended in the report. So sometimes our internal departments say, no, we can't support this, or yes, we can support it subject to conditions, or they might just be supportive with no conditions. So any outstanding concerns that they have can be addressed through the conditions that have been recommended.
Thank you.
No other questions? Councillor Wilkinson.
There appear to be a number of objections related to the signage. Is that something that you've considered as part of the planning? And if so, could you talk about that, please?
Yep, so there is just the one sign that's proposed. It's shown on the plans as 26 Hicks. So it is internally illuminated and it has been assessed against the sign provisions, and recently we had a new advertising sign guideline that was incorporated into the planning scheme, so it's been assessed against that, and given the scale of the sign in terms of the building, it's been considered appropriate.
Thank you. There being no more questions at this point in time, I'll call the first objector. Is Katrina Roundtree here? Thanks, Katrina.
Hello. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak up for my local community where I'm lucky enough to call home. I think it's interesting that there are so many objectors, 125 objectors as compared to 8 for the previous discussion. I am compelled to be here for several reasons as a local community member. So what do we know about this application? I first became aware of the application in 2021, I believe it was, where, as Verity mentioned, this was first pitched to us, to our local community. This was going to be a 4-storey box that would be directly opposite the train station, and at that point in time was to be an education facility and possibly a shop. Now, as you may know, there is no building in Lara that is over 2 storeys. So of course we were anxious about, as I say, something that's pretty much just designed to be well, let's face it, a really ugly box. It would be the first thing that you see as you enter Lara. Now, if any of us are doing our jobs correctly, in my case, involving tourism and getting as many people as possible to come to our beautiful You Yangs and Serendip. So the first thing that you're going to see is this 4-storey box. I believe, as Verity said, it's being amended to 3 stories, still tallest building in Lara, or certainly on Hicks Road. So as you exit the train station, this is the first thing that you see, and this is before people then make their way across a car park, which, if anybody knows that area, and I know every single person in this council is aware of the dire straits that Lara train station is in, because I've actually been here when people have argued, please help us. I understand VicTrack have wiped their hands of Lara parking, and they've said, we are not increasing the parking, there's nothing that we can do about it. I just took a photo, 5 o'clock this afternoon, going down that street. 5 o'clock this afternoon, you still can't get down that street. There is nowhere else to park as it is. How you can possibly think that you would add to this chaos is beyond me. And then you also have the amenity of what would have to be one of the ugliest buildings ever. Added to that fact, 7 times they've changed the title of what this space is going to be used for. Is that not a red flag? 7 times we've gone from an education facility to, I saw the sign this evening, Cow Migration. We have a migration facility that offers visas to overseas people. I believe the company is Singaporean based, if my research proves to be correct. Why that facility would be in a regional town like Lara, why wouldn't it be in the multicultural hub of Victoria in Werribee, so close down the road? Indeed, why would it not be here in the CBD of Geelong? It would be a wonderful place to have a migration facility there. Why would it be in what is currently a little house, Hicks Road, the first thing that you see as you get off the train? So, finally, I just want to say, other than the fact that this area cannot handle any more cars, it is nuts. Visually, it is so unappealing to have that as the first thing you see as you enter our town, and hopefully you make your way up to Serendip and the You Yangs. I just have to add, Monday, I start filming the next series of Country House Hunters. It's just been sold to the A&E network in the States. It's going to over 1 billion viewers. We celebrate councils who honour their history to reap the benefits into the future.
Katrina, you nearly had 4 minutes. I thought you were warming up to a good close-up a minute ago.
That's it. I just would ask that this council, please, spare a thought for our beautiful township and do not accept this application. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Just Katrina, we might have some questions for you. Just double check.
Go for it.
Councillor Wilkinson.
The other one, it's all right. He was pointing to me. It's okay.
Councillor Hathaway.
Thank you for coming. I just wanted to get a clearer picture of the current traffic chaos.
Do you want me to show you a photo of
I
what?
don't think we can. Just sort of for me to visualise at Hicks Street. So are people parking on both sides? Like, is it getting that you can only sort of get one car past?
Well, I'll let you know, Sarah. We've got quite a lot of locals here. It's just not fair that, as it is, residents have people all over their driveways. You cannot, at this point, you cannot get up that street. It is not a two-way street as it is. We all know VicTrack have said, not our problem. We're not adding to it. And what more can I say? It's currently dire straits. It's unfair to the local community. And as the other locals will say, it's simply not safe. It's simply not safe. That's just one of many red flags that I have. I invite you, Sarah, take a little wander down. You've got the pub right there. It's a lovely little street. It's a lovely little, but little I think is the operative word.
Great, thanks so much.
Just from the point of view of duty of care, I'd just like to establish from the officers, I thought that no tenants had been identified. You've identified a migration.
Go straight there. There's a huge sign. I've done my homework. It's a Singaporean-based company. They do visas for overseas. Well, there's a whole list of visas that they're handing out. And that's why I say, wouldn't this be preferable to somewhere like the heart of Werribee? It'd be fantastic there. And as I say, why not in the heart of Geelong? Why would you have it? Why would you have it in Lara?
We've heard your answer. I'd just like to hear if the officers have an answer to that.
Sorry. As I said in the starting submission, that we understand that the existing building on the site is being used as an office, and an office is an as of right use within the commercial 2 zone, so it doesn't require a planning permit to be there. So an office can operate along Hicks Street in any of those shops without a planning permit, and they wouldn't need any permission.
Okay, thank you very much. So we'll call our next objector, Tim Matthews. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you for your time. I have dyslexia, so I hope you'll bear with me while I read my statement. My name is Tim Matthews. I've been a business operator in Lara for 40 years. I'm not averse to intelligent developments. I have a residential property located in Clover Street, Lara, would be adversely impacted by the proposed development at 26 Hicks Street. For 40 years, I've had to deal with non-compliant parking. Council officers have repeatedly refused to act regarding nature strip parking in Lara as normal. I believe any planning decision by council officers that relies upon other council entities, or in particular police, to perform their job is a bad decision. The proposal can't stand on its own. It's not viable. There are 125 objections from surrounding residents to this ill-conceived proposed development, which is serving one single entity. When will the community, the majority, be listened to by our council staff? There are more planning rules and regulations to reject this proposed development than there are to lay down and pass it. If by planning to get this proposal through, including the lack of notice to V-Line and VicTrack, is not acceptable. I believe it's up to you as responsible elected council members to put the community first. I implore you to reject this application for a minimum of the following reasons. The building is in fact 4.3 stories in height. Camera view angle in the published photo of the building is deceptive, and it appears the intention is to hide the upper stories in an attempt to minimise the area amenity impacts. This proposed building would be more than twice as tall as any other building in Lara and simply a bad fit for the location. Hicks Street and the train station are already chaotic traffic scene. Further impact is unacceptable. Sections of Hicks Street are already a one-lane road in all practicality. Any patrons of the proposed building parking at the train station car park will be illegally parking in that car park, as pointed out earlier. And the council officers cannot and will not act, and have clearly stated not their problem. Add to that, up to 49 cars waiting in Hicks Street to park in the vehicular stacker that will block cars and cause road rage. Cars could be waiting for over an hour to fill the vehicle stacker. If we are just popping in to grab a coffee to the site, it's clear choice, park elsewhere illegally. Development cannot control how often and how many cars and delivery trucks will arrive at any given time. Cars coming up the very steep ramp from the underground car park will launch with major momentum onto the footpath before even clearing the garage. That can be clearly seen in the photos. Footpath pedestrian will not be visible due to the angle of the exit ramp. Proposed convex mirrors will not work as the driver's focus will be on negotiating the steep ramp. Council has little to no control as to what businesses tenant this building and less control on how they behave. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Tim. Just a moment, we might have some questions. Any questions, councillors? Councillor Wilkinson.
Thanks, Tim. You were just talking about pedestrian safety
Yes,
as well as.
yes.
Can you just elaborate a little bit on that, just in terms of people walking along that pathway?
Well, as you know, with the train station there are cars everywhere, which means people are walking up and down the footpath. That ramp doesn't flatten out before it gets to the footpath.
Okay.
So you literally have to launch your car up the ramp onto the footpath to then get a view of what you're doing. And to answer Sarah's question earlier, that site has been completely denuded of anything green. Everything's been ripped out of it. It did have a nice house and a nice garden. Now it's just a box.
Just for points of clarity and understanding, Tim, I just want the officers to answer the question about the ramp. I thought there had been some redesign of that ramp. Could you clarify, please, Verity?
The basement, car park and the ramp has been through a few reiterations, and like with the previous application, there is a requirement for the flood barrier, so that was included. But the ramp complies with the gradients set out in the car parking provisions in the planning scheme, and that's been addressed in the traffic report and reviewed by council's traffic engineers, which has been supported, and the ramp does allow for two-way traffic as well.
So on the question of two-way traffic, I understand Tim believes it's effectively a one-lane street. That's what you said, Tim?
Yes, well, it's irrelevant about whether it's two lanes in or out. The very fact that the ramp is still on a slope right to the footpath is the problem. It's a health and safety issue.
Okay, any other questions? Councillor Aitken.
Maybe it's more for the officer than yourself. It relates to the traffic management issue. The reality is the Rennie Street, McClellan and Hicks roundabout is actually always congested when the boom gates are down, when a train's coming through. So in fact, I'm concerned that the traffic management plan actually didn't respond to the fact that every 20 minutes during peak time, the trains are actually going through and we actually have backup of cars coming around the roundabout. So in fact, that we've actually already, and our Lara traffic management plan actually identified that, which the council funded in 2018 and completed it, and actually identified that the overpass was actually required at that or an underpass at that site location. You seem to have strong knowledge about the traffic in that particular
Very
area.
strong knowledge.
Can you give evidence to show the councillors that there is, on both sides of that rail crossing, the backup that actually occurs nearly every single time a train actually goes across it? And I should also add that when we have RSL events and the community market on the weekends, you actually can't, it is a pedestrian hazard, and there has been a number of people that have actually nearly been hit associated with that site location as well too. So do you want to back up my statements I'm making to actually
expand on it? In
Yeah.
fact, McClellan Avenue, the last time I saw the major, about a 700-metre tailback in McClellan Avenue itself. The tailback in Hicks Street is as long as a car park, and which is what 300-400 metres. There are few to no other parks in Hicks Street other than the train station car park. So anyone popping in for a coffee? No chance. No chance. You're not going to pop into a vehicle stacker to get a quick coffee. The tailbacks from the train line now, I think they're even getting down to 10-minute intervals with the trains if the freight trains aren't aligned, and the tailbacks are horrendous now.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, we'll move on. Thanks very much, Tim.
Thanks for your time.
And I'll call Frank Chalfer. Frank here. Thank you, Frank. Please go ahead.
Good evening, councillors and Deputy Mayor. My name is Frank Shalafor. I live 85 metres from the proposal where the worst traffic and parking congestion in Lara exists. Illegal nature strip and off-curb parking blows out into 3 residential zones, including my own. Near misses are a common occurrence from roads reduced to a single lane from parked vehicles. Victoria planning practice notes discourage permits for commercial development when required public parking space for a proposal would be in close proximity or adjacent to residential zones for public safety. This has been ignored. The TTM traffic report supports the queuing of up to 49 vehicles on the single-lane Hicks Street and Bates Road as employees wait to enter the underground triple car stacker garage as being acceptable, based on his published belief that most area and traffic parking will have finished prior to the site's opening and closing hours. Local residents know differently. At the purported info session held by planning on 25 March 2024, I questioned the author of the current traffic report, asking if he had ever been to Lara at the times he endorsed for garage stacker use to judge traffic and parking conditions for himself. His gobsmacking answer was no. When I asked why not, his astonishing reply was, I can't be everywhere. I then showed the TTM engineer the submission file photos showing the actual parking conditions surrounding the proposed site. He stated he had not seen these, despite them being in the permit file early on. It was more than apparent he found them interesting. He should have assessed the site and the surrounds in person at the relevant times before endorsing the scheme. By any standards, this alone disqualifies the traffic report that mimics a desktop-only effort. The traffic report findings of no adverse implications or impacts of any kind to anything would be the norm for someone who had not been to the site at relevant times. The engineer confirmed vehicles exiting the underground garage will not have leveled off completely before they cross the footpath. This blind exit hazard...
Frank, just alerting you, time's up, but so please continue, but be aware you're over time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The engineer confirmed vehicle exiting the underground garage will not have leveled off completely before they cross the footpath. This blind exit hazard was caused by the city's urban development team, who removed the building setback to align street frontages. Saving lives should be a priority over street frontages. On page 118 of the officer's report, a single sentence is used to dismiss the merit of all objecting submissions relating to present traffic, parking hazards, and residential amenity impacts that surround the proposed site. The net total consideration given by the officer to all 125 objections amount to her single response of, and I quote, "It is prudent to note that it is not the obligation of developers to fix existing on-street traffic conditions." I ask this committee not to endorse this hand-pass attitude and to step up now where planning won't, by at least refusing this application, guaranteed to make dangerous conditions far worse. The officer states street parking demand is already high in the area as justification for asking you to improve more of this mess, where residential amenity and safety impacts have been
Frank,
ignored.
you're nearly finished.
I timed this at 3 minutes. I don't know how that
Yeah,
happened.
you've done nearly 4.5 minutes now,
Wow,
Frank.
okay, I'll finish then, I'm sorry. Lara is a bedroom community to Geelong with some 21,000 residents. Local amenity expectations run high in this community. Council does not have to approve making permanent car parks out the front of residents' private homes in order to accommodate commercial ventures that cannot meet required parking. I plead with you to refuse this application and thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Frank. Do we have any questions, councillors? Councillor Hathaway.
So just a question for officers around the claims that have been made about the traffic assessment report. Was that something done by officers or the applicant? And do we have any further information about, did anyone go out there on site as part of that report?
So the applicant engaged a traffic engineer who submitted a traffic report, and like the plans, it's been amended a number of times to make sure that it is correct, and that has been reviewed by council's traffic engineers, which supported the proposal. And we've all been out there a number of times at different times and different days as well.
Thank you.
Any other questions, councillors? Thank you, Frank. And I call Katie. We've seen Katie's name a few times lately. I believe you're proxy for quite a few people, Katie.
I am, that's correct.
Please go ahead.
So, good evening. I'm Katie. I'm a long-term Lara resident, 250 metres from the proposed site. I am speaking on behalf of myself and 24 others who are not able to be here for various reasons, who strenuously object. Summary documents mention the development is in a commercial zone, but fails to acknowledge the surrounding residential and semi-rural zones. The planning meeting held in March 24 did not provide an avenue for community input. As a result, the summary of concerns listed are limited and not an adequate description of objections and concerns raised. I would urge each person involved in the decision-making process to consider if they are familiar with the area and the locals they represent. The representative from the developers at the last meeting in March admitted he did not know the area. I ask each of you to look beyond a paper trail of ticked boxes from a planning application and consider the human element and what flow-on impacts could be. I, alongside several neighbours, have lived in the area in excess of 20 years and have genuine insight, a clear, deep and thorough understanding of the complexities and problems a development of such a large-scale building would pose. To consent to approval would impact on the rights to use and enjoy our properties. Apart from the noise, there are other factors to consider, such as pollution, that could interfere with our health and well-being. For those unfamiliar or who have not read the objections submitted, I bring your attention to some points raised. The loss of enjoyment of homes and is not appropriate with animals and livestock nearby. Area is heavily congested with overflow of parking from existing businesses, including the Lara train station, and long-standing issues with McClelland Avenue level crossing. While car parking and traffic congestion may not be the responsibility of the developer, it is unreasonable for residents wanting quiet enjoyment of their homes to be subjected to further impacts. There is inadequate existing infrastructure, limited car parking availability for existing businesses and residents utilising public transport. Concerns including ruining the appearance and streetscape, noise and environmental impacts, disruptions to existing businesses, farmland and residents, disability access, nearby drainage issues, access of emergency service vehicles and ease of access to and from our homes and proposed operational times, effect on property prices, safety concerns, insurance risks and increased traffic congestion. Aside from objections, it is important to address the existing utilisation of the street. Hicks Street currently supports the International Avalon Air Show, utilising shuttle buses from Hicks Street to the air show. Frequently, buses are required to replace trains. Buses require unhindered street accessibility.
Katie, you're coming to a close.
I am.
Good, thank you.
It also supports the monthly RSL markets. In conclusion, I would remind you this application is not just about meeting planning approval checklists. Objections are about respecting the existing neighbourhood, the preferred neighbourhood character, the constraints of the site, the surrounding area impacts, stormwater and traffic management impacts. I would urge you to engage with your community and constituents to respect their voices, and on behalf of myself and others, I am requesting you to vote no.
Thank you, Katie. Do we have any questions for Katie?
Thank you, Katie. Can I just confirm the only access into that car park for the train station is via Hicks Street?
Correct.
Thank you.
I just, again, for point of clarity, I've understood you've spoken, Katie, about the type of neighbourhood it is and the peaceful neighbourhood you like. I do have to ask this question to the officers. Is it correct that this is a commercial zone?
Yes, that's right. It's a commercial 2 zone.
Thank you.
Just Hicks Street.
Just Hicks Street.
Just Hicks Street. They haven't addressed.
So, yeah.
Can I just answer the question too from Councillor Wilkinson? There's no access on McClelland Avenue to the car park because you have to actually go via Hicks Street because you actually have the overpass there. The boom gates come down and then you've got a roundabout in McClelland Avenue, and in fact it's continuously banked up whenever the boom gates are down. So there's actually no way that there could ever be an access point from McClelland Avenue. It always will have to be from Hicks Street. And the issue about the commercial zoning, it's actually one row of commercial properties that run against Hicks Street. So, in fact, it's not a traditional commercial zone that people would understand for
Correct.
the rest of Geelong. But to Lara people, they know it because that's where the pub is, and that's actually essentially what the commercial zone is that particular area along there. So it's not back on the other, right next behind it is actually residential properties. So it's not
Councillor
a
Mason,
traditional,
can I
zone.
just add to that? Sorry, Councillor Aiken. If I turn your attention to page 100 of the agenda, it has a zoning map of the area and the block of Hicks Street, and then the back at Clover Street, that's all commercial 2 zone from Bates Road to McLaren Avenue. So there's a whole block that's the commercial 2 zone.
But there's a number
Just
of residential
hold it, everybody.
properties.
We don't want too much cross-talking, thank
Sorry,
you.
yeah. Just
Wait. Have you finished, Verity?
Yes, so it's on page 100 of the agenda, the zoning map, that's the purple zone.
Councillor Aitken?
And just to point out, there's actually a number of residential properties that are within the commercial zone. So people actually live within the might be zoned commercial zone 2, but there's actually a number of residential houses that are in that site location and historically have been houses for a very, very long time, which one of our objectives is as well too. So they may be called a commercial zone on the map, but it's actually a residential property that actually exists in there, yeah.
Correct. And may I just address something that Verity said before?
Through the chair, you may, yes.
Yeah, regarding the traffic management report that was submitted. That was submitted with aerial photographs during lockdown, which wasn't a true reflection of the congestion of parking in the area.
Okay, thank you, Katie. We've got to keep moving on unless there's other questions. Thank you, Kate. Oh, you go.
Oh, actually, no, sorry, it's not for you, Katie, it's for officers. Can I just clarify the definition of commercial zone 2?
The purpose of it allows for offices and retail, and because it's a commercial 2 zone, it allows for bulkier commercial uses compared to like a commercial 1 zone, which is for, I guess, softer retail, cafes and shops and things. This is in the step of an industrial zone almost. So, there is a purpose that does allow for offices and retail.
Just sort of in relation to that, do these zones ever get reviewed in terms of their appropriateness, or is that something that happens from time to time?
That's more for our strategic department. Generally, like they're more focused on the northwestern growth areas and things like that at the moment. Doesn't say it's not to happen, but not really a statutory planning consideration.
Thanks, Verity. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll move on to the next objector, John Winkler. Thank you, John.
Okay. Thank you. My name is John Winkler. I live 300 metres from the development and it sits between me and the station, and I've been passing by that for 42 years, so I've got a pretty good idea on what's been developing there. I've got 2 points to raise, and the first one, regardless of the theory, there are traffic and parking issues and there should be no reduction in the parking provisions whatsoever. This area of 26 Hick Street is a victim of Lara's rapid growth, and the decision here tonight really is only how much you want to exacerbate the problem. The surrounding streets and parking are already full. The adjacent Hicks and Bates Road intersection is becoming a rat run actually for people trying to get around the railway crossing bottleneck on McClelland Avenue. And while that's happening on a daily basis, you've got vehicles parked on the verges and limiting the trafficable road. So it's forcing cars trying to get through to have to stop and give way to oncoming traffic. And this includes faster vehicles entering from the north, from the rural areas along the other end of Hick Street. Impacted pedestrian and vehicle traffic includes elderly patrons of the Salvo's store that's right next door on the Bates Road corner, and also parents and children trying to access the kindergarten just around the back on Clover Street. So it's an absolute rat's nest already. Now, the reasons put forward for this parking reduction just don't stack up. The railway is not a substitute for business access. The next residential areas along the line are a considerable distance beyond the North Shore and Tarnage stations, and all of those have got their own service locations. Bus usage across Lara is minimal at best, and the same applies to bike riding access to facilities. It's very low in Lara other than recreational on weekends, and I know I'm one of the few. Wherever I go, I've got spare spots. And there are also, what's really important is the future risks, not what's just happening today. And these include, for example, the railway station. The significant growth across Lara is putting in pressure on the railway station car park across the road. Patrons are already spilling out onto the street, onto Hick Street for parking, and this is only going to increase. And at the same time, what I do know is patrons of the existing business are already using the railway station car park, probably hiding some of the existing problems, and over time more of these are going to be forced out onto the street. So it's not what's happening today, it's what we're looking down the barrel of. I can also point out there are 3 other adjacent businesses on Hick Street along that frontage, and they're currently vacant. So there's 3 businesses that at some point are going to fire up and add to the mess. And just a final comment before my second point. I've got real doubts about this stacker also. Maybe in the Melbourne CBD, but it's kind of hard to expect in the Lara environment. It's very car-based. People are really going to go through all that rigmarole and not just squat out the front like everyone's doing today. Okay, I'll wind up. My second point, very quickly, I think the proposal is completely at odds with the unique low-set, rural, semi-rural neighbourhood character of Lara, and that's long been valued and protected and was a key reason I moved there. And in contrast to the surrounding neighbourhood, the height of the proposal is hideously excessive at around double the height of the already tallest building next door, and I think that would set a dangerous precedent. So, thank you.
Thank you, John. Any questions, councillors? Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll call Brian Lane.
Good evening.
Thank you, Brian, and could you be mindful, please, that the
Yeah,
speaking
I'll be
time is
very
3
quick,
minutes.
I'll only be talking on personal experience because I walk down Bates Road nearly every day, Hick Street nearly every day. I walk there to the shopping centre rather than drive the car because that's our exercise. We do that every day. Only time I drive to pick my granddaughter up from school and her school friends, which can't walk home because it's too dangerous to go down Bates Road or Hick Street with the way the traffic is at the moment. Now on Bates Road, let's start with there, without to get to the building. At the moment, there's a shared footpath. The road is shared. There's no footpaths. So we walk down there. There's cars either side and cars in a hurry to get to the station. They bip at me to get off the road, but you can't get off the road because there's a steep spoon drain there. In the winter, every time it rains, it falls with water. It'll sit there for 6 months and it goes green and you start hearing the frogs there. But if you walk too close to it, you slip and you fall into it because it's wet and slippery. And you can't walk there in the summertime because the cracks get about 50 metres wide, which is liable to sprain your ankles. But the Hick Street, there's no footpaths. The Bates Road, there's no footpaths. We need something done about it.
Thank you, Brian.
Oh, that's just part of it now. I'll get there. I want to query one over there. You're saying it's a 4-storey building, 3-storey building, but on the roof there's air conditioning and infrastructure, correct?
Please, through the chair, Brian.
Pardon?
Just speak through me.
Which it makes it about a metre less than the first proposal. So the air conditioning, the heating is all up on the roof. So it's still a 4-storey building in my opinion.
Okay.
It hasn't changed. The parking there, as it gets wet and it rains, cars can't park in the offload at the back of the old railway house. They have to park down Bates Road, and it comes down nearly 300 metres on Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday. And that street parking, they can't park on the side of the road on Bates Road because there's a spoon dray up there and they won't get out and they'll need to be towed out.
Thanks, Brian. And there's more time if you want.
No, that's all I wanted to say. It's just because it's a safety issue. Have you ever got past and cars, you could feel the wind and you think, oh, he was only inches from me, but it was just the wind for the car. It is scary sometimes
Yeah.
because
Good
you're
on
in
you,
a hurry
Brian.
to get to the station.
So maybe we've got some questions for you. Any questions, councillors? Wilkinson.
Not so much a question, but commending the fact that you're actually out of your car and you're walking around the neighbourhood, which is, I think we all need to do a whole lot more of.
There's a group of us walk that way every day and it could take anything from 20 minutes to 2 hours to walk just that little area. Because if you run into someone, it's still a community area. But if the way the roads are going, it's getting worse. The speed of the cars are coming, none of them doing 50 kilometres an hour. There's more like between 60 and 70 down Bates Road, on the way home or on the way to get to the train station.
Thanks, Brian. And now I'll call David Heffer. We try to stick to 3 minutes, David.
Yes, I'm terribly conscious of that. Thanks for the opportunity to present. So I'll try to stick to my notes and I'll probably make it easier and time efficient. Now, in written submissions I've made on this proposal, I presented data that showed that there would be severe traffic congestion which would block Hick Street every morning and afternoon, and this would have an unacceptable impact on local residents, local businesses and those who use the railway station. And I should point out that I own and operate a business that's located in Hick Street. The proposal provides for 49 spaces, which is 21% less than the 62 required by the city. And even then, it does not provide provision for visitors to the premises. So you cannot park at the place and go and have a coffee in the shop if that's what you wanted to do. You have to park elsewhere. It cannot even cope with the expected number of employees of businesses operating from the premises. And I think from that point of view, the traffic management plan should be regarded as completely unsatisfactory. It has to be expected that 49 spaces will be fully utilised every day, and the proposal in 6.1 estimated the total peak demand is 56 spaces. And based on the capacity of 2 stacking machines, cars would need to start arriving 1.5 hours before, let's say, a 9 o'clock start. And at the end of the day, there's a similar delay for some of the people who work in the premises to get home or to leave to go home. And that's largely controlled by the stacking machines. When I raised my concerns at the information meeting, I was told that the solution to the problem would be flexible working conditions, working hours. But even if half the number of employees at 26 Hick Street were required on any particular day, with again, just say, for example, as a 9 o'clock start, it would be necessary for cars to start arriving at 8:30 a.m, which is an unusual sort of arrangement to have in Lara. People don't operate that way. But even if and they would have to start arriving at 8:30 a.m. And not only that, they have to arrive at 1 minute intervals. Now, there's already been a lot of discussion about the congestion that's caused by the closure of the railway crossing and the roundabout that's at the end of Hick Street. And so there's no practical way where you can control the arrival rate to the premises. And if you had those 25 vehicles, which is half the number of spaces that are allocated, not half the number of the employees, it's less than that. But if they, for example, started to arrive at 8:40 and finished arriving at 5 to 9, that would mean that those 25 vehicles would represent an arrival rate of 100 cars per hour. The stacking machines can only cope with 64.2 per hour if there's no blockages within the building itself. And it's not as if it's got a parking lane on site that copes for that.
David, I think we've got your point.
Yes.
Just about a minute over now. I've
sorry,
been very flexible tonight, but I can't continue that. We won't finish.
No. The traffic management that's documented in the proposal only deals with the idea of blockages created inside the building. They do not deal with the traffic blockages caused by the traffic to and from the property. And so the stacking machines cannot provide a satisfactory solution, even if you work on flexible hours. And I think it would be a complete failure of the city's planning requirements if the proposal was to be approved. I just think it's completely unworkable. It would place unacceptable demands on off-street parking.
Thank you, David. Yeah. We'll give extra time if there's questions. Any questions? Thanks very much, David. I'll call Barry White now. Good evening, Barry.
Good evening, Councillor Mason and councillors. I'll also truncate my presentation because I think a lot of the important points have been made. The current infrastructure and capacity in this area for parking, for traffic movements, is totally inadequate. I would also make the point that there was no reference in the Planning Officer's report about the Lara Traffic Management Plan, the 2019-2029 Lara Traffic Management Plan approved by Council in 2020, because that highlighted the issues of congestion and safety and capacity at the rail station. Now that was effectively a static review. If we take into account what's happening in future, particularly with the western development of Lara, we're going to see continual increase in traffic, including commuter traffic, people using the rail station. So the demands on this area are going to continue to increase significantly. There's no indication or clear indication of what amount of traffic and visitation will be generated by this development. It's not clear at all, and its future use is unclear. In fact, it's something like a chameleon. It seems to be changing its form to suit the circumstances. The description we're given really tells us next to nothing about its proposed use. It's not just the traffic within the site which is of concern, it's the traffic generated by the site, and there's been reference to that with people using the shop. And I can't understand at all a view that you would use the downstairs car park for patrons of the shop. We don't even know what the shop is going to be, apart from some reference to beverages and what have you. So it is unclear what the use and traffic generation will be, and therefore it's almost impossible to determine what the traffic impacts will be. The planning officer did respond to some concern I had about the project, and she mentioned that the existing use of the land is not assessed as part of the current planning application, but it's the proposed use that's of concern, not the existing use. It's the proposed use and consequent traffic and parking implications that are most relevant here. The formal description we now have been advised, and the planning officer's interpretation, which removes any obligation on the part of the proponents to deal with the major issues, namely traffic and parking identified by most objectors here tonight, is really a subterfuge to avoid planning permit regulations. Council planners are in fact enabling the applicants to ignore these community concerns. So we maintain our opposition to this proposal in the absence of any actions and evidence to mitigate community concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. Just a minute, Barry. Any questions, councillors? You've got good empathy there, Barry. Oh no, here we go.
Just lost it.
Would you like to make a comment about the neighbourhood character and amenity if Lara does increase more than 2 stories, and the impact that that can actually make on Serendip and other areas? If would you like to, and Hovels Creek?
Absolutely. I did include some reference to that, but didn't have time to raise it. Look, that's a very relevant point. I mean, the area we're talking about is a combination of shops at the present time and other facilities. But not for a 3-storey building. We've got areas at the bottom of McClelland Avenue, which are commercial, industrial areas which are available for use. We've got the developments to the west, new developments, where something like this, if it's required and there's an opportunity, would be a location. But this is the wrong place, and I think the comments that Katrina made early on about people arriving in Lara, particularly by rail, first thing they see is a 3-storey building which is totally out of character with the rest of the neighbourhood. And all we see is a sea of cars and a combination of buildings of various shapes and sizes, but it's totally inconsistent with what you might expect for a commercial centre. This is an anachronism. This has been left over from bad planning in the past, and we don't want to repeat bad planning for the future.
Any other questions, councillors? Thank you, Barry. So, Maxine O'Mara. Your time's only starting now, but it is 3 minutes, Maxine.
No, I don't need that. I was going to request that to be given the opportunity to pass my submission to Barry, to Frank, sorry, and
Maxine, could you just sit around a bit and just get onto that microphone a bit more?
Yeah, I was just about to run, you see. I was intending to ask for the opportunity to pass my time to Frank so that he had additional time, but all the time that I'm not going to take someone else has used it anyway. But I just would like to say that I object to the proposal. It's not in keeping with Lara, and I'm a newcomer to Lara, only been here for the last 12 months. And it's one of the things that I've observed is the number of cars that there are in the residence. They're just incredible. People have got a double garage, but there's 3 or 4 or 5 cars parked within the surrounds of the house. Anyway, in a nutshell, I'm objecting, and I think that the development is in keeping with the location. Okay.
Thank you, Maxine. We might have some questions. No, we don't.
Subject you to any questions at all.
Thank you for a very concise summary, Maxine. And the last objector of the night is Lionel McWilliam.
I objected to this in the first proposal, and I still object to it. And one thing that does stacker system underneath the ground. With the way things are going with EVs and like that, and the chances of one of them going up in smoke is going to cause a lot of problems for that area. So just that fact turns me off this proposal. The other thing that is around in that area, you've got at the roundabout, the takeaways, e.g. Subway, Town and Country Pizza, Indian restaurant living, and even the cars would be parking down near them in their car parks and on the side of the road. So it's not a good fit for the area. I have heard what everybody else has said. My main impact with the development is to have traffic, parking, safety and pedestrians. If this building is to be used only as an immigration facility, why does it need to be 3, possibly 4 stories high? Looks like there could be a hidden agenda here as to what the intended use of the building is. It appears that there has not been full disclosure because it keeps changing, as Barry said. There are vacant offices in the Centreway, which could probably accommodate this type of business, and I agree with what Katrina said. Why wouldn't you put it in central Geelong or up the road at Werribee? You wouldn't get people coming from Deakin University to do their visas out to Lara. It's a no-brainer. You know, it's a lot of other places, a central place for this type of thing. And it's out of character with Lara. I've lived there for 40 years and I've seen the changes, and they're only going to get more and more. And but some things just aren't meant to be in those places. Thank you.
Thank you, Lionel. And questions? Thanks a lot, Lionel.
Thank you.
So now we'll hear from the applicant, Tim Norton.
Good evening all. Thank you.
Good evening, Tim. Thank you very much.
Thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak. And yes, I have been listening intently to everyone's comments, particularly the community. I guess I'll start with, and it's probably aware, as you've seen in the officer's report, Hanson did join quite late on. I do know this has been a long-standing project. There has been multiple revisions to it. Our job was really bring it more in line to what we felt was appropriate. And from our involvement since, I think we came in Feb 23, we feel that the applicant has been demonstrating genuine efforts to respond to community and council concerns. When you compare the latest proposal to the original, I just highlight some key things I thought was important. That yes, they removed which I understand was very contentious, the education component. They have reduced the 4th story, and I will touch on that in a bit because I understand that height matters, important to the community. There was originally, I understand, with the original proposal, a 54 space reduction. That has resulted in the current amendment in a 13 space, so it's quite a big difference. And by doing that, we've sought to provide the parking on site in the basement configuration. I do think if you look at the comparison of the renders, the built form is vastly different. It is a different architecture, and obviously I've got to support my one, but I do note with our revision we have provided setbacks and rebates to try and improve the perceived bulk of the building, and that also talks to removal of the fourth storey in the latest plans. There is outdoor terracing proposed, and agree with council, they've asked for a condition for landscaping, which I do think is an appropriate way of making sure those outdoor terraces do provide good amenity and also help soften the built form and providing meaningful landscaping opportunities there. As I said, there's improved terracing to the upper levels. I think the external expression has shown some improvement, and we've worked quite a lot with council's urban designer based on their feedback. One of that was to improve the activation in the latest proposal to Hick Street. Again, that's why they're offering a shop at the front to provide some passive surveillance and kind of activate that location. Just to continue on that, I think obviously there's been talks about car parking and design matters. I'm just going to touch on some things which I think not necessarily being considered in detail or mentioned tonight. We have obviously got the planning controls, which Verity's touched on. It is a commercial 2 zone, which is zoned for such uses. But another big thing for us as planners is to look at what planning policy is mentioning and asking for. Lots of planning policy at state and local level is saying you've got to provide opportunities for commercial growth, particularly in Lara, which is understood to be designated. It is growing. It has to be done on a case-by-case basis, but they are recognising that. And as part of that, they are encouraging opportunities to both supply new employment-generating uses to support existing towns. In this case, you have got a shopping strip. I have to admit, I did try and find the report to work out at what point it did get zoned to that. I couldn't find it before this meeting, but we work with the zoning here, and I guess I'd point out there are other retail, food and drink premises, and if this development were to be built, it could provide opportunities for local expenditure. You know, employees at lunchtime or after work could use the nearby facilities. I think there is opportunity for business synergies, which is something that policy does encourage. Just looking at some of the documents, I have looked at the structure plan, the Lara Town Centre Urban Design Framework, and the Geelong Region Plan. All of these do kind of talk about supporting expansion of commercial uses in locations that are zoned for those uses. So I felt that was appropriate to mention. In terms of the comments that have been raised, I think, yeah, it's clear the two things are the height and the traffic. I'll probably start with the height. I guess from our point of view, obviously the key thing was we did recognise from, particularly when we came on board, that the height was an issue to the community and urban design at the time at council. So we did sort, and we had a meeting with council planners and our applicant, and we said, we think you need to offer some meaningful change. And so they did reduce the height to 3 storeys. On the comment on there being plant and equipment, if you look on the roof plan, it is an enclosed area. It doesn't extend across the whole roof. It's not going to be, you know, screening across the entire length and width of the site to add that extra height. It's just enclosing the plant on the roof. The commercial 2 zone doesn't prescribe maximum height limits, and I guess in that context highlighting, whilst recognising there has been a historical zoning and we have got kind of different uses changing, this area will change, it doesn't have maximum height, and there is an absence of design controls such as design development overlay which might prescribe height limits. We are confined as planners to the definition of height in the planning scheme, and I know the officer report talks about that, about how you define a story. It has sought to attempt to respond to the neighbouring 2-storey development at 24 Hick Street with a transition of, you know, a story up from there, which we felt is appropriate. Urban design has been referred on this application multiple times. I understand in their latest referral they were supportive of the overall height, and that was a combination of things where obviously providing rebates in this latest design, providing outdoor terraces to allow some amenity space, and that will be complemented by what will have to be endorsed, a landscape plan. With regards to traffic, unfortunately our traffic engineer isn't available tonight, so I'll do my best to talk to the traffic matters. I guess TTM we work with regularly, and they have been engaged throughout the process with both council traffic engineers. We've had lots of feedback to and fro with them. And we understand they got to a point where traffic engineers, the qualified ones, are comfortable with the proposal. Just on the car parking, I don't think it has been touched on tonight. Again, going back to planning policy, planning is about balancing competing objectives, and I'm not undermining. It sounds like residents are aware of parking situation in the neighbourhood. Planning policy does talk about reducing car dependency and reliance on private transport. I don't know, for what it's worth, I've lived in Melbourne 7 years and never owned a car, and I know, appreciate I'm not from Lara, but me and some of my cohorts don't own cars, and I think just pointing out this site is adjacent to a station where you've got the V line. I got the V line here tonight. It's not, I think there's an assumption that everyone will be using cars driving to this development when you will have employees that will be choosing to do personal sustainable transport. We have provided surplus of bicycle parking. People might walk. We're hoping that this might encourage some local employment generation. It doesn't necessarily assume that everyone's going to be driving here via car. And just on with the various council conditions they're proposing, on the safety matter, I think condition 1D talks about having a convex mirror to deal with that, but there are notes on the permit that should it be approved, they are required to get approval before construction from council's engineering department for vehicle crossing permits, etc. So there is an extra safeguard whilst they've supported it at the referral stage. They look at it again, that's my understanding, and they won't issue permit vehicle crossing that they feel isn't compliant with their requirements. Again, just on the car stacking, I understand that's been important to the community. Council has suggested a car parking management condition, and in that condition there is a requirement talking about a plan for the use of the mechanical stackers. For what it's worth, I would submit that offers an opportunity for another level of scrutiny from council engineers, because that management plan has to be endorsed before they construct. So again, I think under that condition, because it mentioned the mechanical stacker, it is something that I believe engineers will scrutinise as part of the endorsement process to make sure that's compliant, it's something they're comfortable with before they endorse that, allowing development to occur. As for the queuing analysis, the traffic report did talk to the queuing matter. They felt it was appropriate, and that is touched on our latest traffic report. But again, I feel the conditions are a good safeguard in that respect, and hopefully do offer some assurance that there is another level of review. Obviously, if the application goes forward at endorsement stage, it does allow those discussions to happen where engineers will look at it again before they sign off on anything. Just in terms of other things, just highlighting that the referrals have been supportive, and we have really tried since we came on to work with council and listen to their feedback throughout the process, and we've come to a position where we have got supportive referrals from the various departments. That's all I've got to say, but happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Tim. So, councillors? Councillor Hathaway?
Thank you. I'm just wanting to clarify use, because I know there's been changes in plans along the way. So is it the plan that the ground floor would be sort of food, commercial, and then the next 2 floors would be office use, or something different?
Yeah, so there's a shop and a cafe based in the foyer area on ground floor. As Verity's pointed out, the shop does need a permit, but the cafe and the office use doesn't. And I guess that talks to some of the comments earlier. Unfortunately, we can only really work with the scheme controls and offices as a right. I'm not aware of the nature of the existing operation, but yeah, the permission is for the shop use in this case.
Councillor Nelson.
Thanks, Mr Chair. My question's to the officers just around use. Maybe I've just gone off on a bit of a tangent with what I'm reading, but it's in a bushfire prone area, is that correct? Because it just hasn't been spoken about, so I just want to make sure I've got this right in my head. And that's subject to clause 13.02-1S, so there's specific things that it cannot be because it's in that bushfire prone area. Is that right or not? Is that not right? Am I not reading that right? On page 123.
There are certain uses that when they're in a bushfire-prone area, have to be referred to CFA, and then they require different notes or conditions on the permit. It's not strictly because you're in that area it's prohibited. It's just an extra consideration of the planning assessment. But because it was in that bushfire-prone area, we sent it to Fire Rescue Victoria, and they came back and they said they had no issues with it, but did recommend that it was assessed at the building permit stage for construction considerations.
So, just correct me if I'm wrong. So does that mean it's not allowed to be an application for development that will result in people congregating in large numbers? Is that what that says?
No. So it means that if there's certain uses, so on where it says the proposal is not listed at clause 1302-1 as one of the following uses, those are the types of uses that have to be referred.
Yeah.
And have to be considered because, yeah, obviously we wouldn't want large numbers congregating in a bushfire-prone area. But you can see on the map on that page it's only partially within that area. But even though it wasn't one of those uses listed, we still referred it to FRV for their comments, and they were comfortable that it wasn't going to cause any risk.
I'm just concerned because we're being asked to approve something that we don't know what's going to be in there, and it's in a bushfire-prone area, and I'm concerned that if that does occur, where are these people going to go? Because we've already heard that the car park's full across the road's dangerous, so if there is an emergency, where are these people going to go?
I guess if it was a significant bushfire risk, it would be covered by a bushfire management overlay. This is just saying that it could be a bushfire-prone area, so it's not a planning overlay. It's more a consideration of if it got a planning permit and it went to the building permit stage, that they consider the bushfire attack level and making sure that that's all being covered off then. But if the education centre part of it was still included in the application, this clause would say that we have to refer it to Fire Rescue Victoria and take in their considerations, and if they said it was a no-go because of that use, then we would have had to go with that. But it's not one of those use listed, but we still sought their comments and they were comfortable.
Thanks. Just one more question. Thanks. And the overshadowing, because it's in a commercial 2 zone, is the overshadowing different for commercial to what is for residential or not?
Yes, that's correct. It's different. So there's no particular assessment for overshadowing for the neighbouring properties because it is a commercial zone, and there's no maximum building height in a commercial zone as compared to a residential zone that specifies maximum heights.
All right. Thanks for that.
Thanks, Councillor Nelson. Councillors, any other questions? Thanks, Tim.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
So we have an officer recommendation. Do we have anyone that...
I'd like to move a refusal if you're asking for a motion from council.
Or do you want to move an alternative motion? Yeah. Okay. Go ahead. You, a seconder? Councillor Nelson.
Very much, Mr. Chair. Look, I would like to move a refusal to grant of a planning permit for development of a multi-storey building under the following conditions. 1, the proposal fails to achieve best practice in environmental sustainable development in accordance with clause 15.01(2)(l) of the Environmental Sustainable Development. Point 2, the proposal fails to satisfy the purpose of clause 52.06 car parking and the decision guidelines of clause 52.067 for car parking reduction. Number 3, that the proposal is inconsistent with clause 65.01 of the Greater Geelong Planning Scheme and that the proposal does not adequately respond to the relevant policy and will not result in an orderly planning outcome for the site. Number 4, that the proposal does not respect neighbourhood character of the area. Number 5, the proposal will have an adverse impact on the amenity of the area. And number 6, the proposal is detrimental to the traffic management goals identified in the Lara Traffic Management Plan. So that's my formal motion that I'd like to move.
Could you repeat number 6, please, Councillor
Number
Aitken?
6 was that the proposal is detrimental to the traffic management goals identified in the Lara Traffic Management Plan.
You're seconding.
Yeah, I'm seconding. I'll reserve my right, Mr Chair.
So, do you want to speak to it?
Yeah, thank you very much. Look, I think if you looked at this and said it's a commercial area, and then you've got a train station opposite to you, you probably would reach the conclusion that has been presented by the officers to grant a planning application. But if you've actually got local knowledge, you actually come up with a completely different solution and outcome. The reality is that the neighbourhood character of Lara, this actually will establish a precedent. So in fact, not only does it change the neighbourhood character, it actually creates a precedent that Lara is going to have multi-storey commercial and retail buildings within its commercial zones and its retail zones. And at the present time, it has none. The highest is 2-storey. And so, in fact, the community has been quite strong to actually say that neighbourhood character is significant. And we do have to protect that, and that's actually probably what has attracted a number of the objectors. Then there's the issue about the amenity of the area. It's been presented very strongly by the objectors tonight and in the additional material that was presented before the officers. The amenity of the area is already under significant stress associated with the poor access to get to the car park associated with the Lara train station. That amenity is only going to be worse if you actually try to condense more access to this particular site. And then there's the issue of car parking. Look, I acknowledge that it seems to be an easy solution to actually say you've got the Lara train station car park right opposite this facility, and it can justify why there should be a reduction in the required planning requirements. We have a responsibility to think about the future, not just the existing site location now. The reality is that with the growth of Lara West, that car park is only going to become even more important asset for the train station and for those people that actually want to commute. And even though today there may not be a policy about restricting access to that car park to people who are just commuters, the reality is that will happen in a future date. So it would be wrong of us to actually say we're going to issue a permit to reduce car parking because there's car parking available on the other side of the road, when at a future date at some time, V-Line or its future contractors will actually say that that asset's ours and it should be used for commuters, just exactly what we're experiencing now with the Geelong train station. Then there's the issue of traffic management. Look, it is a significant concern that we already have problems in that area. And to actually further compound it, if this building goes ahead, there are at least 3 other existing residential houses which will be attractive for developers to actually come and say, well, we'll purchase those residential site locations. We'll build minimum 3 stories on those sites as well too, and it will further add to the traffic congestion that exists without proper infrastructure or response to it. And the last one that I want to respond to is actually, it's not a planning matter, but it actually is, you should have a social licence to enter into someone's community, and clearly this development doesn't have a social licence. A social licence means that the community actually wants to embrace you and support you to actually exist in their community. The reality is 125 members of the Lara community have actually said, no, we don't want you coming into our community, irrespective that from a planning perspective you might have a right to, you believe you have a right to actually do it. The social licence has been broken with this proposal, and the community has strongly said that they do not support the introduction of this particular activity, which is a 3-storey commercial building in a site location that's not appropriate. So as a consequence, that should be considered, and Lara is quite strong about that. The goat farm...
Councillor Aitken.
Yeah.
Can you hurry up?
Don't talk about the goats.
The goat farm was a classic example where that developer had no social licence to operate in that community.
I think your
And it
social
was
licence has
defeated by
been...
the community.
Councillor Aitken.
And we also had the waste disposal facility that the Lara community had to fight against as well too. And there was no social licence for that one as well too.
Councillor Aitken,
So
your
the
social licence is being withdrawn at the moment. So,
All
please.
right, thank you. Yeah. Mr. Chair, with respect to yourself, I will finish there and just say that the proposal does deserve to be refused. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Aitken. Councillor Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I certainly won't speak at my 3-minute limit. I certainly can't support this application, just like I didn't support the other one tonight. It's too big. Yes, it's in a commercial zone, I get that, but the shortfall of car parks is a concern, and to say that you can use the car park across the road, I've parked at that car park many times, and there's a vacant block of land just next to that house, and you end up having to park into that block of land. It's that bad. And to approve an application with unknown tenants in a bushfire-prone area, I think is really risky, especially when you have to have an emergency management plan, and to try and do that and escape because you can't use the car stackers to get out. To have that out in the street is dangerous. I just think we need to have our community first, and the protection of human life, and I just think it's too risky. And traffic is just an absolute nightmare there, as we all know. It's a very small road. Yeah, it's a commercial zone, but I think that was a planning anomaly that happened a long time ago. And it's just, I don't think it's appropriate. And I'm certainly in favour of the alternate recommendation. Mr. Chair, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Do we have any speakers against or any other speakers? Councillor Hathaway.
Thank you. I'm speaking in favour of the alternate recommendation as well. I'll keep my comments brief. Yeah, it's my view that it does not respect the existing neighbourhood character. As we've heard comments tonight, it's a low semi-rural area of Lara, and a 3-storey development is not in line with that. We've heard extensively tonight of the existing traffic and parking issues in the area that, acknowledging whilst they aren't the fault of the applicant, they are issues that need to be resolved by council and state government to allow for further commercial development in the area. And I guess on the health and safety angle, I have personally visited the area. I've attended the Lara Community Market with my 5-year-old and partner, and I felt like we were taking our life into our own hands trying to cross that street. So I certainly have a lot of empathy for those that live in this area and are dealing with this on a daily basis. So I think on those grounds, there's work that needs to be done here, particularly in reference to point 6. The traffic management plan, we've got work to do in that space. I don't think we've heard anyone here tonight in the councillor group or from the members from the Lara community opposing economic development. We want to see commercial and economic development, but it needs to be appropriate, it needs to be safe, and needs to meet the character of the existing area. So I think it would be poor planning on our part to approve this application with the 21% reduction in parking that will further exacerbate issues in the area. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hathaway. Any other speakers?
Yeah, I'm also in support of refusing this application, but I do also want to acknowledge the complexity here because this is a commercial zone and, you know, black and white, it's a commercial zone. I also, warrant the applicant's thought of actually using public transport and, walking to get around. These are all, aspirations in terms of the way we need to be living. We certainly need to be living to be able to manage the environmental impact ongoing. But it does seem like an anomaly. It's a commercial zone entrenched in a neighbourhood. And yeah, for those reasons and for the reasons already provided by my fellow councillors, be refusing this application.
Thank you, Councillor Wilkinson. Any other speakers? I'll say something. I'll say it this way. I've had quite some difficulty with this because I think that there's been significant effort in going through 7 amendments, trying to find perhaps what's called the sweet spot, perhaps not the social licence sweet spot, which might have been overlooked. But certainly on paper, it's compliant in almost every respect. And it's until we understand more about the local knowledge, the things that stand out for me is the uncertainty about traffic management, parking and the stackers perhaps. I'm not so convinced about I think there's been a great amount of effort to reduce the bulk and the visual impact of the building. On balance, though, I think also there are issues that need to be resolved. This commercial, though it's a commercial 2 zone, it appears to be limited. And I feel for the officers who've had to work with the planning rules, where there may well be difficulties put upon them by these planning rules. But on balance, I too find I can't fully support, I do fully support the alternative recommendation. Though I know, I see that there's been a lot of work being put into this to try and find and accommodate all of the needs. So anything else anyone wants to say? So I'm putting the alternative motion. Those in favour? Those against? Carried. That was difficult.